My name is Revd Matt Woodcock and I'm a pioneer minister at Holy Trinity Parish Church in the centre of Hull. I used to be a journalist on the York Evening Press and absolutely loved it, didn't want to do anything else, would have sold my own grandmother for a story. Wonderful time there, lots of stories, lots of interesting people, lots of ways of engaging with people and their ordinary lives and the dramas of that and the tragedies of that and the joys of that. And I didn't want to do anything else. And God had other ideas. And one day I was going to cover a court case in Selby on the A19. And I'm driving along, listening to some U2. And all I can describe is something hit me on that road. I felt like my stomach was turning over, my head began to swim, and I left the road. I sort of struggled with the car and I ended up pulling into this lay-by, absolutely terrified about what was happening to me. And I just prayed to God to calm me because I felt like He was doing something remarkable. I didn't really know what it was and I didn't really know what He was wanting to say. So I went and calmed myself down and I went off to cover the court case. And that night I walked into my vicar's office, and the first thing he said to me, he said, "Woody, have you ever thought about working for the church?" And it was like a massive eureka moment. I knew for the rest of my life what God wanted me to do, which is work for the church. I have this big thing that the church often requires people to come to it, to walk into the church before we engage with them. I don't like to do that. I think it's important that the church goes out to where people are and engage in their everyday lives and bring something of the love of God, hopefully, into their situations. So one thing I've tried to do at Hull is just to meet people where they're at. This has tended to involve men and particularly sort of working men in their everyday lives. So one of the first things I did when I moved to Hull was walk into the boxing club, which is over the road from our church. And I walked in terrified with my dog collar on, and everyone looked at me like I had three heads. But they were really nice, and I ended up joining this boxing club. It's been wonderful to engage with the men in this club and just to be able to pray for them and with them. And they've ended up coming to church services and asking for prayer. We ran the beer festival because we wanted people to engage with our building. We have the biggest parish church building in the country. It's like an aircraft hangar in there, it's massive. And I'd run a music festival. And at the end of that music festival, somebody said, "What about having a beer festival in the church?" Because they needed a new venue. And they wanted the church because of the cool temperatures. And I said, "I can offer you that because it's freezing." So it was a big risk, and we were worried as a staff team that people would drive us out with pitchforks if we tried to do this. But it's one of the best things I've ever done. We had over 4,000 people over 3 days coming into the church. I'd say 70% of those walking into the church for the first ever time, despite living in Hull all their lives. We were able to talk to people and pray with people and laugh with people, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful experience. There was no trouble, there was no overt drunkenness, and it just showed us that you need to get creative with your church spaces and people will come. All we often hear from churches is when something goes wrong, when somebody leaves for whatever reason, or there's a big split in the church or whatever. There is more good news in church communities than anywhere else, and we need to tell people. It's no good having all this good news if no one ever finds out about it. But me and my wife were frantically trying to have kids, and it wasn't working. So I went for some tests, and it turned out that I had virtually zero sperm, and it was devastating because the doctor told us you will basically never have children. You'd need a miracle to have children, and it was awful, and it was the worst possible news. But crucially, we didn't give up hope because we believe in a God of the impossible. And we took as much prayer as we could get. and we decided we would embark on IVF treatment. And then we ended up having 4 goes of that, and it was awful when it didn't work. Very traumatic for my wife particularly, and it just basically looked like it wasn't going to work. And loads of people prayed for us, which was quite a big thing for me, because it's quite an embarrassing thing, or it was initially, to tell people what your problem is as a man if you have fertility problems, and then get them to pray for it. I took as much prayer as I could possibly get. So whenever we went in for the IVF clinic or whatever, we knew there was loads and loads of people praying for us. And by the grace of God, He did grant us a miracle, and we ended up having twins. So be careful what you pray for. The times I know God is most real is when I find life hard, or a struggle, or something's gone wrong, or I'm under pressure with something. Because it's in those times, in those weakest times of my life, I've experienced Christ behind me, in front of me, and next to me, never letting me down.